Hello, welcome to the backfield. I'm your host, Connor Schaff, and welcome to the biggest takeaways of the Chinese Grand Prix, and welcome to another edition of a Takeaway Tuesdays. This is the series where every Tuesday after an F1 race, I give you my biggest takeaways and talk a little bit about the race, a little bit about Formula One, and see where we are all at. And we definitely had a very, very exciting weekend of racing. We had a sprint race this week as well as a main race. And we also had some pretty big news regarding the this season. So we will be talking about all of them in the video. And we also will be talking a little bit about the F1 Academy races this week. As I always mention, I do like talking about these feeder series, as I always think it's good to bring awareness to these drivers that are moving up their ranks in the Formula One system. So that is what we'll be doing today, and we will be getting right into our first takeaway. So let's start by talking about our podium finishers for today. And before I do that, I do just want to mention that I do apologize for the audio during this video. Unfortunately, I'm currently not at my home, and I do not have my mic with me because the last two times I have brought my mic to the airport with me, the mic has been flagged by TSA as they had to check and make sure there was not a bomb in it, and that is a true story. So I thought, given everything going on with TSA right now, that would not be the smartest decision to bring my mic with me. So just play it safe on this one. So we are going micless on this one. We're using the computer audio, so it's not going to be the greatest audio we have for today, but hopefully it isn't too bad. And let's first start by checking out our first takeaway, which is all about that we have a new Antonelli, the same George Russell, and we have the old Lewis Hamilton back. Start by talking about Antonelli. You can say all these things about the fact that he was gifted this opportunity because of George Russell's car issues, but you still have to execute during the race. Every time he had the chance, he went out on top throughout the session, and it wasn't like it was a totally mistake-free session from him. Even on the second to last lap, he had a lockup into the final turn, or into the second to last turn after the long straight in China, and it could have been a lot worse for him, but he managed to recover, still won the race by 7 to 8 seconds, and it was a very impressive weekend from him. These are the type of weekends we need to see from him if he wants to win a world championship. But on the other hand, I still think what we saw from George Russell is very impressive because he had nothing but issues all weekend and still walked away leading the championship, finishing first in the sprint and second in the main race. He is still up by 4 points. Keeping in mind, Kimi Antonelli hasn't had any, outside of the fact that both Mercedes have had issues with starting, he hasn't had any actual car issues like George Russell had in major sessions. And he made some of his own mistakes in the Australian Grand Prix that led him to being second. And it still was impressive that he was able to get second in that race with all the issues he had. But George Russell managed to fight through his car issues and still get second and get it by a wide margin still, by about 15 to 20 seconds. And then we have to talk about Lewis Hamilton. It is so nice to see Lewis Hamilton back on the podium. It was so nice to see. He was so supportive of Kimi Antonelli when in these post-race interviews. He was so happy to be back on the podium. He seems to be really enjoying these cars, really enjoying these regulations, and it is just really fun to see, and I'm really enjoying seeing him doing well. It brings a smile to me to see him doing well in Formula One, and I do think that this is the year that he really, at the end of the day, really the lowest he can be in the championship at this point is fourth place. And he'll be competing for a podium every single week because of the car he's in. He might not be competing for race wins, but he seems to be happy with the podiums he has the chance to get, and he is executing really well. And we'll talk a bit more about the Ferrari battles later in the episode, but I do think that is really, really exciting to see there as well. And next up, I want to talk a little bit about Liam Lawson, who has been on fire. And unfortunately, last week in the Australian Grand Prix, he had a big issue on the start with his car. He managed to qualify in the top 10 in that race, but the car just wouldn't get off the line. At the end of the day, it could still be a driver issue to an extent, but at the end of the day, I have no reason not to trust the team and the driver, and both of them have said that it was a car issue, and it's really just unfortunate that he was in that situation. And Liam Lawson still managed to finish 7th in both sessions this week. He managed to score 2 points in the sprint race and 6 points in the main race, and you just have to commend him quite a lot because he is under so much pressure this year. He has to realistically he has to absolutely dominate his teammate this year in Arvid Lindblad. Lindblad is the only rookie on the grid. Liam Lawson, this is his first season in his career where he's actually getting to do testing and stay in the same car, be able to grow in this car, learn with this car. And I'm a big believer in Liam Lawson, and I think that this will be a year that he shows a lot, and we saw that this weekend from him. In fact, now he is actually tied for the most points of any Red Bull driver with Max Verstappen on 8 points. So he is ahead of Hadjar, ahead of Lindblad, and on the same points as Max Verstappen. And we're going to talk a bit about the pace of these different cars next up. And we can actually see, and we'll move over to our next graphic, that the Racing Bull's pace is actually behind the Red Bull, Haas, and Alpine, and he finished ahead of one of the Alpines, one of the Haas's, and both Red Bulls during this race. So that is a very, very, very impressive result for him. But let's talk a bit about our midfield battle, though, because I don't quite think that the Racing Bulls are in this midfield battle. But instead, we have a bit of a shocker in the midfield battle where it seems like a Red Bull are in the midfield battle with the Haas and Alpine. And let me just say, Oliver Bierman, it's unfortunate for him because I think a lot of us were tipping him to be a Ferrari driver for the 2027 season, assuming that Lewis Hamilton would retire. But at this point, I just don't see any world that Hamilton retires if he's having this much fun while racing. And for that matter, look past fun. If we go to 2027 and Mercedes engine gets nerfed into the ground by the FIA, the Ferraris could very well be that team to step in. As like, look how much Red Bull are struggling at this point. And McLaren, obviously, clearly there's something there about them not having the full engine capabilities or the full engine understanding that Mercedes does. But they would get that same nerf that Mercedes would get. So Ferrari could be there in the 2027 season to win a championship for sure. But we can take a look at this graphic and we can see that Gasly and Bierman are ahead of both Red Bulls on pace comfortably. There isn't that much larger of a gap between Russell and Hamilton as there is from Gasly to Verstappen. How crazy is that to say? Gasly and Bierman are comfortably ahead of both Red Bulls on pace this weekend. And you look at last weekend, it's really not that different either. Obviously, Verstappen had quite a lot of pace around Australia. Hadjar qualified third, but in race pace, it just wasn't that great from the Red Bulls still. And at the end of the day, there are more tracks like China than there are like Australia. Granted, we'll get a track a little bit more like Australia in Japan with those really high-speed corners, but a lot more track. You think, just go down the list. You have your Monza, you have your Vegas, you have your Miami. You have these tracks with these long straights that really benefit from power generation down the straight. That's why the Mercedes was able to beat the Ferrari today, is just because of that power down the straight. That's what Hamilton was complaining about the whole race, is the lack of power down the straight. And the Red Bulls have absolutely none of that. And because of that, I think we're going to have a really interesting midfield battle that's going to include the Red Bulls. I do believe in the end the Red Bulls will come out on top. I think mostly because I think they have the best driver lineup of the three teams. But I think that Gasly and Bierman have a good chance individually to be up in the championship with at least Hadjar this year. And you have to think that Verstappen will have some races where he just dominates compared to the rest of this field. maybe not upwards of the level of the Mercedes and Ferraris, but could compete for that fifth place. But especially given that we're looking at we didn't get to see the McLarens at all this weekend. And from qualifying pace, the McLarens are way ahead of these other cars still. Now, they might not be on the level of the Mercedes. In qualifying, they're not too far off from the Ferraris. So they can qualify upwards of third, which I just don't think that. I think that Hadjar got quite lucky to qualify third in Australia. And I think we'll really have to see in Japan if this was an outlier or whether this is the consistent trend for Red Bull this year. But I definitely think there's a lot of cause for concern for them. Next up, we're going to be talking about Haas a little bit more. And I think Esteban Ocon is starting to become on the hot seat. This guy has struggled so much since the start of the second half of the season, since the summer break of last year. He just has been so far behind Bierman. He's had no pace in this car in comparison to him. Let's go back to this qualifying pace or this race pace for a second. He's 4/10 off of his teammate. That's crazy. It's pretty insane that this is a situation where we don't see any other driver pairing outside of the Cadillacs, which you can't really judge the Cadillacs on. Obviously, Gasly and Colapinto are the same, but like you don't expect Colapinto to be on the same level as Gasly. You expect Ocon to be on the same level as Bierman. And when you have Jack Doohan just sitting there waiting in the wings for an opportunity, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some conversations happening behind the scenes of whether Jack Doohan should get a chance in that seat instead of Esteban Ocon at this point. And as a guy that's contract ends this season, I think it's going to be really tough to see him in F1 next year based on how he's been performing as of late, which is just really disappointing to see because I think Ocon is such a fun personality to have in this sport. He is one of the only drivers to come from his type of upbringing where it was really a struggle for him to get into the sport, it's just such an admirable thing. And it's just unfortunate to see him struggling in the way he is. So I'm really rooting for him to have better performances, but it's just tough to see at this point. Next up, I want to talk a bit about these regulations, and I have to be honest, if you watched that race and did not enjoy it, then I just have to think that you have something against enjoying Formula One. The Ferrari battle during this race was one of the best wheel-to-wheel battles I have ever seen watching F1. Granted, I've only been watching F1 for the last few years. I have gone back and watched a lot of past races at this point. But that Ferrari battle lasted for so many laps in a row. It reminded me a lot of that 2022 battle in Bahrain between Leclerc and Verstappen, where they were just constantly going back and forth with one another. And what almost makes this even better is that they were actually wheel to wheel with one another. It wasn't just battery passing or what you would formerly consider DRS passes. These were actual wheel-to-wheel battles they were having through corners, and it was so fun to watch. I was on the edge of my seat watching this race at 3 o'clock in the morning, and oh man, it was just so good to watch. And we also got some great battles between the two Ferraris and George Russell, and some great battles down the field as well. And it's just really nice to see this in Formula One. I know that some people are calling the racing fake, and I personally find that pretty silly because how is this any different than DRS overtaking? DRS overtaking is just as fake in theory as this is. It's just you're getting a boost if you're close to somebody with the chance to overtake. And yes, I know there's the extra bit of battery worked into it. It does seem like we're going to have some small changes going into Japan for battery. From what I have heard, it looks like we're going to move to a 60-40 split for battery of using 60% normal fuel versus 60% of the normal powered car, like what you would expect out of a V8, V10 engine, versus the hybrid engine only being at 40% now. So it would only be 40% battery reliant compared to 50% battery reliant. I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make, but it'll definitely be interesting to see how it works in practice. And then I I just I've really been enjoying watching these last three races. I think between the two main races and the sprint race, there was so much to enjoy. Obviously, I think the biggest concerns have to be once these teams start to better figure out these regulations, if things will get a lot more boring, as that is what happened in 2022. We had a great start to the regulations, and by the end of 2025, the races were getting really boring. But if you go back and watch the last few races of 2025 compared to this, they aren't even remotely comparable. This is so much more enjoyable to watch, and I don't understand how you cannot be entertained by watching this. I love watching the sport, and I love watching these battles. It's so much fun for me to watch. So I'd definitely be interested to hear what you think in the comments. Let's also talk about the big news of the weekend, as we are down to a 22 race season. Maybe. Let's first talk about the announcement itself. Formula One announced that the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix will not take place in April due to the ongoing situation in the Middle East. The Grand Prix, alongside F2, F3, and F1 Academy rounds, will not take place as scheduled. While alternatives were considered, no substitutions will be made in April. And I think that this is a very interesting thing. Let's first mention that this was a thing that needed to happen. I know it really sucks that we're now not going to have racing in April, but let's first say that it's more important for the drivers to be safe. It is more important for the teams to be safe. And if F1 and the FIA cannot be guaranteed that all the personnel will be safe, this was the correct decision to make, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Regarding alternatives being considered, at the end of the day, these teams have schedules, these teams have routines, there are real people in these teams that have lives outside of F1, and it's not as easy as just waking up one day and deciding we're going to go race in Imola or Portimao or the or any of these other tracks. Instead of these races, there are actual real life situations that have to be at play here, and I don't really think it was realistic to reschedule or replace these races within April. But there's some very interesting terminology in this post, though, that says that the races will not take place in April, and also that there will be no substitutions made in April. F1 has not said that we will be finishing with a 22 race season. That means that there are two situations that could happen. We could have two more races added later in the year. So a lot of people are saying maybe we should have a second race around Silverstone, or have a second race in or end up adding Imola later in the year. As Imola is a F1 ready track. We've raced at it for the last 10 years plus. In addition, Portimao will be on the grid next year. It has to be ready to race as of next year. So why not get this started early? There are some of these races that would make much more sense to happen on the European leg of the calendar than happen during this first Middle East leg of the calendar. So I wouldn't give up hope quite yet that there won't be races made. Regarding F1, F2, F3, and F1 Academy, F1 have announced that they plan on rescheduling these races to other tracks, so we should still get a full season of F2, F3, and F1 Academy, and not actually get any less races for those. But definitely make sure to keep an eye on news regarding whether we get any new races. I don't want to give you guys too much hope, but I do think there's some interesting stuff to think about here regarding that. And then let's finish off by talking about F1 Academy. So for this week of F1 Academy, I forgot to add a new image there. We still have our F3 image from last week, so I do apologize for that. But we had Alicia Polmovsky qualify on pole for the race, the Red Bull sponsored driver, and she qualified on pole, but the driver that was actually the quickest over the weekend was definitely Emma Feldmeyer. She is the Audi-backed driver, and she was the only driver to finish on the podium in both the sprint and the main race, and she definitely looked like the quickest driver all weekend. Nina Gademan, the Alpine-backed driver, she won the sprint race from the sprint pole position. Obviously, in F1 Academy, the top 8 are reversed for the sprint race, so she qualified 8th, which meant she was first for the main race. I would also like to mention that Alba Larson, the Ferrari-backed driver, she was in the position to win the race. Again, keeping in mind that in Vegas last year, she was in this exact same position where she was in first place, ready to win the race. Keeping in mind she's never gotten a podium before. She's in first place, ready to win the race, and makes a mistake going into the gravel at the last turn and going all the way back down and missing out on the race win and on a podium. It's like clockwork for her at this point. It's happened twice in the last 2 races. It's absolutely crazy. But I definitely think, looking at it, it definitely seems like Alicia Palmowski and Emma Feldmeyer are going to be the 2 favorites for it, for the championship this year. So that'll definitely be very interesting to keep track of. But with all that being said, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below your takeaways for the race and what your thoughts on these regulations are so far, as well as your reaction to the 2 races being canceled and what you think F1 should do about it. So I will make sure to stay tuned for all my future uploads. Hopefully I'll be able to do more F1 content here, but worst case, make sure to stay tuned for the next Tuesday takeaway video after the Japanese Grand Prix. But with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching and have a good one. Bye.